we have the rare privilege to see an empire collapsing day to day in the news. And willfully, wantonly, Donald Trump giving away the unique sources of American strength. Xi Jinping sees that. Xi Jinping has been saying for a few years now, we are seeing changes unseen in 100 years, and Trump is accelerating that. So what's Xi Jinping trying to do? He's taking the opportunity, as Trump offends all his allies, including Australia, tariffs everywhere, alliance, insults everywhere. He's trying to win over as many countries as he can to his plan for global dominance. That is the Xi Jinping plan.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has been in China this week, a picture of warmth as he shook hands with Chinese President Xi Jinping. But there's a lot happening behind these carefully stage-managed moments. As one commentator put it, the tightrope along which Australia's been walking between the United States and China just got pulled tighter at both ends. Today, international and political editor Peter Hartcher on how Anthony Albanese is balancing his desire to ink more trade deals with Xi Jinping while facing pressure from the United States to fight against China. So, Peter, we keep being told just what a massive deal this trip to China is, and in particular, how much of Anthony Albanese's focus has been on strengthening our trade ties with China. So, how much trade is he talking about? Is it really that big a deal?
Yes, it is. The trade is big.
Yes.
It's by far Australia's biggest trading partner, our biggest export market, and it's the potential in the future that's the real excitement in this trip. Although, oddly enough, it's been largely overlooked by the media covering the story, with an honourable exception of our own correspondent, Paul Sakau. But that's been a peculiarity of this trip.
As in, it's been overshadowed by defence questions for Albanese?
It's been overshadowed by the pursuit of a non-story and a non-issue. Actually, it's kind of it's a real oddity. The media coverage, the media travelling party with Albanese, because each major media outlet has a reporter on the trip travelling with the Prime Minister, including our Paul Sakau, who's done an outstanding job. But the general pack has approached it like little kids walking past a haunted house, waiting to be scared, waiting to get that shiver of fear, waiting for something to go badly wrong. Nothing has gone badly wrong. The big picture, as you know, Samantha, is that Donald Trump is, we have the rare privilege to see an empire collapsing day to day in the news. And willfully, wantonly, Donald Trump giving away the unique sources of American strength. Xi Jinping sees that. Xi Jinping has been saying for a few years now, we are seeing changes unseen in 100 years, and Trump is accelerating that. So what's Xi Jinping trying to do? He's taking the opportunity, as Trump offends all his allies, including Australia, tariffs everywhere, alliance, insults everywhere. He's trying to win over as many countries as he can to his plan for global dominance. That is the Xi Jinping plan.
Yeah.
Australia is he sees Australia as a ripe fruit that's ready to fall, and he wants to pluck the fruit. And that's what this trip was about. This trip, Albanese got double banquets
yes.
on the same day
Yes.
in Beijing.
Yeah.
He had the president give him a lunch banquet, and then he had the premier give him a dinner banquet. I hope Albanese's belt is holding up under the strain.
Yes.
That's what this is about.
Yeah.
And yet the Australian media got itself mightily distracted by a non-issue that wasn't even mentioned by Xi Jinping, and that's the contention over the port of Darwin.
Right.
Which is a detail of a problem at a moment when the big picture is the reordering of the entire planet. That's why I say it's a real peculiarity that most of our media outlets got carried away by what is really a non-story.
Okay, and just to remind listeners, we're talking about the handing over of the 99-year lease of the Port of Darwin from a Chinese-owned company. That was an election promise that Albanese has made.
That's right. It's bipartisan Australian policy. Both Labor and the Coalition have said we will require the Port of Darwin to be sold to an Australian owner.
Okay, well, let's talk about the big picture then, because you just mentioned there that Xi Jinping sees Australia as like a ripe fruit to pick with regards to, I guess, economic opportunities. So tell us about this, because we know that Albanese made a big sort of push, I guess, for collaboration between our two countries, in particular on green iron.
Yes.
So tell us about this. Like, how big a push is this?
It's enormous. Ross Garnaut, who, apart from being the author of the climate change review, the Garnaut Review, was going back a couple of generations, Bob Hawke's economic advisor, who wrote the report, the Garnaut report, on how Australia should take advantage of the economic rise of China. And Ross Garnaut said to me that this trip this week by Albanese and the positioning to sell China rather than just raw rocks in the form of iron ore, but a processed smelted iron in the form of green iron, was the biggest moment since Bob Hawke who was Garnaut's employer, Bob Hawke went to China, went to Beijing in 1984 to set up the trade which has become the iron ore trade, Australia's dominant export to our biggest export market. Garnaut says this is the equivalent of that moment. That's how big it is.
He said something to you. He said it's the future of the Australian economy. I mean, that's both massive and isn't that a little bit scary, though, in terms of our reliance on China?
Yes, it is. You said that Xi Jinping sees us as a ripe fruit to pick, and he does. And he sees that, yes, for the business and climate opportunity, which is a critical part of this. But he also sees it as a strategic opportunity. Any country that is a US ally that can be somehow split off from the US and neutralized, or better yet, come onto the Chinese side, is a critical win for Xi Jinping. And that's all embodied in the trade. The whole Chinese modus operandi is to capture countries, to compromise them with investment and trade, and in countries that are open to corruption, with large personal emoluments into the bank accounts of leaders and politicians, to use money to compromise countries and get them into the Chinese camp.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. So it's all of the above. He's out for not only country capture, he's out for systems capture. He wants to capture the US alliance system and the whole planet.
Well, tell us, I guess, about what sort of pressure Anthony Albanese has been under then during this trip with regards to, well, how is he going to walk this tightrope, it's been called, strengthening ties with China while at the same time protecting Australia from, an increasingly aggressive China? Like, how much pressure is he under?
Nobody in any of the major political parties is criticising him for going to China. Nobody's criticising him for trying to promote Australian trade with China. But the opposition is very excited about his failure to have a face-to-face meeting with Donald Trump since Trump's re-election. They're getting very anxious about it. They're lecturing him all the time, urging Albanese to meet Trump. They were saying, a whole raft of Liberals and former Liberal Prime Ministers came out to say that this is terrible to be going to see Beijing before going to Washington, which is complete nonsense because, serried ranks of former Liberal Prime Ministers did the same thing.
Not to mention the fact that other prime ministers of other countries have successfully met Trump. I think it's South Korea or Japan, and now the relationship's even worse than before their leaders had met. So,
well, there's a wisdom in Albanese just taking it very calmly, the whole Trump phenomenon.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing is you've got a very high chance that you're going to get beaten up somehow if you turn up in Washington and go in front of the TV cameras with Donald Trump. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
A second thing is Donald Trump is really unpopular in Australia and in most countries around the world at the moment. There's no political mileage. So there's neither alliance mileage nor political mileage for Albanese to be rushing, begging on his knees to Donald Trump. But the opposition, which is in the mindset where Australia is always wrong and Donald Trump is always right, can't see that and has it backwards. So that's where the pressure is on. You ask how much pressure is there? Well, it's not pressure that troubles Albanese at all. Freshly re-elected, massive margin, going to this great reconciliation trip, really, with Xi Jinping. But the opposition is banging on about it.
And yet It seems that the priority of this Prime Minister is to meet with the President of China rather than the President of the United States. Well, the United States is our core strategic ally and has helped to underpin peace and security in our region since the Second World War.
And we heard this morning the Shadow Defence Minister, Angus Taylor, saying that Australia really needs to commit more and more explicitly to the defence of Taiwan.
What we can do is jointly commit to peace through strength and deterrence in the Taiwan Strait, in our region more generally. That's what we all want to see. And I think
which is just a strange, unrealistic and unwise thing for Australia to do, to pre-commit to any armed conflict. That would be nuts, and the US certainly doesn't do it, and neither will Anthony Albanese.
No, but I believe you've written that Elbridge Colby, who's the US Undersecretary for Defense, he was pushing, I think even before Albanese landed in China, for some assurance with regards to how we would behave should China and Taiwan come into direct conflict, right?
Yeah, that's right. He's been asking Australia and Japan for explicit undertakings that we would get involved militarily fighting against China and with the US to protect Taiwan should China make an armed grab for it. This is unrealistic. It's also insulting to countries like, well, specifically Australia. We are allies. We have a treaty between us. Australia, quite apart from that, is the only US ally that has fought alongside the US in every war, even its most stupid and ill-advised wars of the last century. And Elbridge Colby knows that very well. He made that point to me over lunch in Washington, D.C. late last year. He said, "You guys have been with us in all our wars, even some of the less well-advised ones," meaning Vietnam, Iraq, which were just strategic disasters, and he acknowledges that. So he knows that. So why is he pressing for these assurances now, Samantha?
Well, why is he?
Well, the reason is because if he thinks that Donald Trump wants him to recommend dumping AUKUS and weakening the alliance, this could be his pretext. So he's asking a question that he knows cannot be answered. The Japanese have refused to answer it. The Japanese cancelled a trip to Washington because they were under pressure on this. And Australia will not answer it. No country, US ally or not, will commit publicly to a war that hasn't occurred in circumstances which we don't yet know. And Elbridge Colby's willful refusal to acknowledge what he's publicly, and in the alliance talks going on now, what he's said to me, and I've written at the time, it's on the record, that Australia is a uniquely reliable ally, and yet now to question that in the alliance consultations tells you that he's setting up a possible pretext, if he thinks Trump wants it, to dump AUKUS, to dump the agreement, and perhaps to weaken the alliance.
And so how's Anthony Albanese feeling about this? Because he was very careful, right, when he was questioned about this while he's been in China, in terms of what his responses were.
He is being very careful. He knows the game. He understands very well everything we've just been talking about.
Your government's raised concerns about the military build-up and the lack of clarity around what it might be used for. Do you feel confident that China is a force for peace in the region after this meeting, or do you?
Well, what we did was we put forward Australia's position, or I did, which is that we want peace and security in the region. That is in the interests of both Australia and in the interests of China.
We can see this clearly, Samantha, when other countries do it. We, in general, in terms of the media debate and coverage at the moment, we seem to have trouble recognising it in our own case. And what I'm talking about is this. A country that is in a position to swing either pro-US, pro-China, let's say Vanuatu. We can see when the Chinese go there, offer them big investments, trade, security guarantees, whatever, and the US is anxious and the US thinks, well, what are we going to do? We can see that country, in this case, a hypothetical Vanuatu, is adeptly playing the two great powers off against each other for maximum domestic benefit. When Australia is in that position, Australia is subtly, not openly admitting it, but subtly playing the same game, playing the Chinese and the Americans off against each other. We seem incapable of understanding that that's what we are doing. Unless the Prime Minister explicitly says it, we can't see it. But that's exactly
Why do we have that reluctance
here.
to understand this or to admit it to ourselves, do you think?
I think we have an unreasoning fearfulness in it's Australia's historic approach to the world, being fearful. Fear of abandonment was the title of a book by Alan Gyngell, actually, that described Australia's strategic history. Wow. Alan Gyngell, former diplomat, former head of the Lowy Institute, the late Alan Gyngell, brilliant thinker. He said that Australia had this unreasoning fearfulness that we would be abandoned and live in this sort of tremulousness permanently. And although Australia, I would submit, has become a little more assertive and a little more confident in recent years, that attitude still permeates, and I think it colours the way our media approaches these issues as well.
Interesting. And all of this brings me to, it would seem left of field, but it's an incredible piece of reporting that you had over the weekend because you secured... It was incredible. You secured an in-depth interview with the president of Finland at his castle, no less, while you were in the country the other week. You really are our international editor. You get around Hartcher. And the president told you that Australia could learn a lot from his country in terms of how it's bolstered its protection against Russia, which, of course, is its own overbearing neighbor intent on dominance. So what does he think that we should perhaps take note of? Because I think many listeners, like myself, would think, wouldn't have thought that Finland was some sort of mirror for us in terms of how we might approach defence, but...
Yeah, that's right. It's so far away. But it's in fashion at the moment because for this exact reason that Finland has turned out to be the model country to show smaller powers how they can coexist with an aggressive and very unpleasant great power. They've got more than 1,000 kilometres of border with Russia. How they manage to retain their sovereign independence. And he himself, Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, made the point that while they have Russia, Australia has China. And both of us, almost everybody, is under some sort of economic threat from Donald Trump at the moment. So there are analogies, and he drew those out. But it's also under study for exactly that reason in Canberra. And the ANU, Rory Medcalf, head of the National Security College at the ANU, has actually published an entire paper on how Australia should copy Finland's strategic policy in its approach to keeping our independence. What Stubb told me was that the first thing Finland had done right was never to relent in its suspicion of Russia's intentions. When the rest of the world stood down after the end of the Cold War and the Americans, everybody else said, the Cold War's over, we don't have to spend on defence, we can relax. Finland didn't. Finland retained its conscription and it retained its comprehensive security policy, which is a whole-of-nation policy which brings in the private sector, citizens, where they are constantly rehearsing and thinking about what to do in the event of a crisis, how to keep their supply lines open, how to have stockpiles ready for all the vital stuff, medicines, food, munitions, all the rest of it, and keeping conscription running non-stop. The only country that did, never eased up. They have a compulsory conscription system for young men, national service type training, and voluntary for women. So all of those elements are the elements that the Finns have prosecuted and that they explain as the basis for their ability to deter Russian attack, but that hasn't stopped Vladimir Putin from promising future attack.
No, and in fact, Putin, I believe, has been building up defences just on the border with Finland, right? So it's quite an acute issue for the country.
Yeah, it is. They're under assault from Russia. Effectively, the war, covert and hybrid war, is already underway. So Russia, just briefly, three things that Russia is doing to Finland, and I'll mention each of them because they have analogues in the way China has been treating Australia. One is building military infrastructure along the border. We don't have Chinese infrastructure on our border, but we have Chinese military patrols increasing in intensity in our region and off our coasts. And they're not massing troops, but they're building bases and the Russians are building bases and future positioning for their forces right on Finland's border. They're also waging hybrid war, cutting undersea cables in the Baltic Sea that connect Finland to the world, internet, telecommunications, phone, just as China has been doing in the Taiwan Strait, cutting undersea cables there. This is a kind of hybrid warfare. It's designed to unsettle other countries, and it's a precursor for what happens in a war. All those things happen, plus you get the kinetic attack as well.
And one thing I was really interested in is what he calls public-private sector cooperation. So can you sort of give us some examples about this? Because there was one stat in your piece that sort of made my jaw drop, and it was that Finland has civilian shelters that can house 4.4 million people out of the population's 5.6 million people around the country. I mean, that's just one of the efforts that they've undertaken to sort of, I guess, shore up their sovereignty or their protection. What else was he talking about when he referred to public-private sector cooperation? Because that's quite distinct, right?
Yeah. Well, this isn't in the law, but this is just a habit that has emerged, encouraged by the government, for companies to talk to each other. So the banking sector talk about how do we keep the system running if there's a massive hacking attack and an attempt to shut down the banking system. Fuel supplies. Companies talk to the government about how to keep supplies running if there's a crisis and their supplies are cut off. All of this stuff. They have 18 different sectors, I think, where there are plans, contingencies. Companies talk to government about it. It's a constant. It's a mindset, really, knowing that a crisis could be around the corner because it's happened to them in the past. And notoriously, they were attacked by Russia.
Yeah.
But they were plucky enough to manage to retain their independence.
It's quite interesting. And you mentioned that Rory Medcalf, who's the head of National Security College at the ANU, that he's written this paper sort of pointing out, I guess, what Finland does with regards to its defences. Is there any... Do you have any feeling that these are things that our government might adopt? Because you make the point that this concept of whole of nation security, it was actually recommended by the Albanese government's Defence Strategic Review, but that's where it remains, on paper only.
Yes, it's in the review only.
Yeah.
Well, the Defence Strategic Review did make that recommendation,
yes.
And said that we need a whole of nation commitment to preparation and building resilience. Resilience, I suppose, is the key word here.
Yep.
And the government adopted all of the recommendations in that review. But implementation is another question.
Yeah.
And there's not a single visible step that the government has done anything about that. But theoretically, it remains government policy. Any
chatter in Parliament House or elsewhere that we should know about that maybe would suggest that this is going to leave the realms of the paper? No, not a whisper. And even really basic, obvious, necessary stuff. For example, the Defence Strategic Review said the government should stop using the defence forces every time there's a flood or a fire, yes,
and create a separate civil service, civil defence mechanism to take care of national emergencies. So the military can concentrate on being the military and not being an emergency relief mechanism.
Yep.
Progress on that?
Crickets. And what about conscription? And that's obviously, because we've discussed this on previous episodes, that it's becoming more popular in other countries.
Well, the Germans are introducing it. Last week, the Swedes started conscription of young women. National service, I should call it really, for
any chatter in Canberra that this is something that we might, national service might return?
No, and it will be a brave Prime Minister to implement that short of an absolute crisis or some obvious provocation. But there are other ways of, there's national service that doesn't involve military training. There's a whole range of ways to approach this. And emergency responses is a soft way into all of that. We don't even see them approaching that. So the government's a long, long way away from being able to implement, being prepared to implement its own policy.
Well, we're lucky you're in Canberra just about every other week, so we know you're going to keep your ear to the ground on this.
And I'll be there just for you next week, Samantha. And the week after. Parliament's back.
And the week after. Well, Peter, as always, thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure.